From the beginning of this journal entry, it will appear that we are returning to the old format of a voiceover rather than an improvised walk and talk. The reason for this is because I have a lot I want to talk about today, and there will be some references that I want to make sure I get correct. Last Friday, one of my campaigns hit a major point of revelations, I guess. And shortly afterwards, the YouTube algorithm gave me a video from an educational channel I hadn't watched before. It led me down a little mini rabbit hole that gave me the words to kind of describe the importance of the story beat in the campaign. Words I didn't really have before, or at least words I didn't recognize I had before. I'll put the links to the two associated videos down in the description. But we'll start with the context for the event and then the actual event in the campaign story itself before we dive down the rabbit hole and provide a few different lenses for the experience to be understood in. The campaign in question is for a group that has been playing together for about 2.5 years now. They are on their second campaign together, and both of them have been focused on heroism. The first campaign was all about being the noble heroes, going off and doing all the cliches with it ending kind of prematurely with a heroic sacrifice, which kind of fits. For their second campaign, I wanted to take it into a more moral gray area zone. They would certainly be heroes, but the situations would be rougher, and it would be about finding what the most heroic thing to do actually was. Given this greater breadth, some of the players have made their characters have choices that add some more complexity for me, and my job becomes laying it out and then pressing them to deal with the situation rather than me being the source of the moral conundrums. One such character doing this is Kane. Mechanically, Kane is a human Psi warrior fighter type person. Rather than taking a traditional path with the psionics, the player decided that he wanted to make the Psi warrior be a flavored, a bit more for a darkness about Kane's past. He grew up in an abandoned battlefield among a feral goblin tribe that ate the dead. Kane was a cannibal, originally haunted by the ghosts of his sins that learned to control those supernatural occurrences to better empower himself. In short, Kane's cannibalism wasn't just of flesh, it was of the souls as well. Now, the rest of the party did not know the souls thing. They knew about the cannibalism. The majority of the game, or at least through a majority of the game, any unorthodox eatings was based around giants and merfolk and those sorts of things, but still, it's kind of a problem. There was even a bounty hunter and judicial plotline that brought Kane before a court. The party was generally trying to straighten themselves out for more than a few moral felonies, and would eventually be given directive from an angel to succeed or else. So yeah, generally trying to get people into this moral pathway eventually, but having a little bit of time to get there. During the time in court, Kane was approached by a mafia-esque NPC that the party had determined would be a fiend in disguise. In a private scene between only me and the player, the fiend offered Kane a magical box for parcel deliveries, so he could send him steaks to fuel his cannibal powers without the worry of needing to find entire corpses to satisfy his needs. No complicated contract, no missions, just a means of facilitating Kane's sins. The player agreed. Over the next handful of months, the player would make mention of sneaking away, eating at night, all that to tease the situation until he was finally caught with the box, though he wouldn't let anyone know what was in it, what was being delivered, even that it was magical. In time, the party found themselves consulting a hag in the Feywild on a quest. When the conversation soured from a few lies, the hag demanded the party clear the air on secrets. She was just enjoying trying to fracture relationships, but in the greater scheme, this made Kane admit that he was receiving cannibal steaks. The hag intuited the souls bit and teased about knowing, but let that remain for a bigger crevice in the party for a more stressful time. Last session, things broke down. For reasons I can't say yet because the players don't know yet, Cain snapped after an airship combat. The desire for his sin grew unbearable, and he locked himself in a private room. After some deliberations, the party sent a letter in the parcel box to the fiend, and one of the party members cast a divination spell. It eventually ended with one of the characters casting a detect thoughts spell on the weakened and weary Cain. Delving deep into his mind, rather than even having the caster ask questions of Cain's player, I took the opportunity to have the dialogue with the caster. As he asked questions, I played out the bartering scene between Cain and the fiend like a flashback. Everything was revealed as if the caster had witnessed the important details in the room itself. With the complete revelation of what Cain had been doing for so long, this story beat essentially acts as a rock bottom for the character. As the party of heroes have been dealing with other missions, other problems, other growing points, Cain has always had another layer of secrecy to prolong his own downfall. Now, with everything out in the air, the character is now put in a position of having to now deal with the problems and become a hero in spite of them, or, as is the theme of the campaign, fall away from the party if he doesn't. I don't expect this to be a sudden thing, but following the greater themes of the campaign, those are kind of the general directions it's going to move in. So, we have the context of the GM diary and the core subject that will be examined. Now let's take a step to the video and perspectives that make the final scene so important. While scrolling YouTube, I saw a video called How to Read and Even Enjoy Poetry by the channel Writing with Andrew. I've read poetry in school, I've written some, I do poetic riddles for my games. It seemed like a nice, light, educational video that I could listen to while doing chores where I was familiar enough with the topic to not have to fully focus on it. Coincidentally, the starting line of the video was "Poems aren't riddles," so my most common use for them was amusing. I worked, I listened, it was pleasant. Then halfway through the video, Andrew does an example poem that threw my mind back to high school English class and generated this entire diary entry from it. The poem was The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. If you haven't read it, I'll read it for you now. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. That's it. That's the poem. In the video by Writing with Andrew, he uses it as an example of poetry capturing moments in time, painting pictures, and letting you experience something, if only for a second. He imagines being at a farmhouse, the pleasantness of the wheelbarrow being at rest, and the chickens going through the yard. In the context of the video about making poetry accessible to anyone, the poem acts as a seed that gives birth to a daydream, feelings, and distinctly, no greater meaning. No vast philosophical themes or metaphors. If anything, Andrew invites us to paint outside the lines by letting us imply the farmhouse is there. He puts the red wheelbarrow leaning against a tree unused. He takes those few short stanzas and lets his mind build around them to flesh out the experience. Andrew's method of reading and interpreting the poem is distinctly not how I remember being taught it. By no means does that make it wrong, it just clashed with that moment in English class that I hadn't expected to be conjured so quickly into my mind. Once Andrew's video was over, I did a quick search for other videos about the red wheelbarrow to see if they matched Andrew's or my memory of class. I found the video The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams Analysis by the channel English Nerd. Carly, the English nerd by name, does a much more focused breakdown of the poem. I mean, that should be expected considering her video is specifically about analyzing the poem rather than Andrew using it as a stepping stone to help newer poetry readers. Once again, I'll read the poem before summarizing Carly's view. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Carly's breakdown of the poem hits a lot of the big points I would expect of a poetry analysis. The organization of the poem on the page, the presented imagery and interpreted metaphor. She points out that the stanzas are wheelbarrow-shaped. The starting line of "so much depends" acts as a plank that the rest of the poem kind of hangs from and kind of depends on the word depends. She does call out that we don't explicitly know what so much refers to, but eventually does answer with the idea that it's about society. The wheelbarrow and chickens are very farm and agriculture related, and the poem has a kind of a commentary on how society depends on menial occupations, but has them go unnoticed. While Carly's analysis is exactly what I would expect of a thorough dive on such a short poem, it still wasn't what I remembered from English class. My memory somehow combined Andrew's purposeful instruction on teaching newer readers with Carly's meticulous breakdown to get another completely different interpretation. When I was taught this poem, it was at the beginning of a poetry unit, and the teacher was teaching us how to deliberately read poetry. It was an honors class, so we had a lot of kids who knew how to find meaning in things, whether it was correct or not. And he wanted to teach us how to understand a poem, a subject that invites infinite interpretations. Some of us expanded and settled in, like Andrew. Some of us analyzed and found social commentary, like Carly. My teacher wouldn't accept any of it from our class. He simply wanted a single answer. What is so much? What does so much refer to? He worked us for most of a class on such a short poem, and many of us didn't like the answer that we were given in the end, or the answer that we were worked towards. That's why I remembered it the moment Andrew first said the title, The Red Wheelbarrow. I'll read the poem one last time to give you a chance to think about it before passing on my memory of the lesson. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So, what is so much? What depends upon the wheelbarrow? The answer we didn't like was the poem. The poem itself depends upon it. The rainwater has nothing to be glazed upon. The white chickens are not there without the wheelbarrow for positioning. There isn't even something to be read. Without the wheelbarrow, there is no poem. If you're frustrated by that explanation, I get it. It seems very much like a pretentious answer, but for a class of pre-AP teens who are used to making things up and making good-sounding arguments about why they should be right, the lesson wasn't about the experience of the poetry or a deep understanding of symbolism, metaphor, themes. It was about reading what was on the page. The lesson was about finding answers in the text and focusing on what is actually there instead of what we assume to be there. For everything that poetry could say, he wanted us to recognize what it actually said. It's frustrating, but extremely important for understanding why I needed that scene in Friday's game to be a flashback. The content of the scene was a revelation to the party that the cannibal character was getting soul steaks from a fiend. But why did it need to be a scene that was witnessed from the game master instead of a glorified truth compulsion conversation between players? Throughout the campaign, the characters have been experiencing Kane's odd behavior in small snippets. Comments of not eating right now, motions of him leaving in the night or eating while on watch at camp alone. All of the other players suspected what was going on, but each were building their own narratives. Like the poem experience of writing with Andrew, players would naturally build fitting ideas to support the short descriptive glimpses that they were given. While all feasible and even probable, they all were personal experiences and not necessarily the true canon of the campaign. As the campaign approached the angelic decree to get the party above board and then the two-way box admission in the hag's hut, the party could do deeper dives into what was going on. The themes of the campaign were the center of the conversation, similar to the English Nerds video. We saw the structure of the campaign and the expectations of finding salvation. We all knew Kane was getting meat from a fiend and could expound on what that could mean and implications. The party had already had previous conversations with Kane with varying degrees of honesty and insightful scrutiny. Had the detect thoughts on Kane simply been another moment of hearing the player's words describing around the event, everything would have remained up in the air. However, me, by taking control of the detect thoughts and playing it out in a theatrical way, The core moment of the deal, the whole table then got a firm foundation of what that core text was. It wasn't someone talking about a pleasant farmhouse. It wasn't a breakdown of how the words are laid out and describing a poem about society needing the foundational labors. It was a moment of going directly back to the text. This is what it says. This is what happened. Without understanding the very core of the moment, none of the outer or deeper layers mattered. In a sentence that I greatly self-identify with, both players and game masters can be pretentious honors students that think they know what is going on when they are missing the very simplest of insights. We assume we know what is going on, and we assume we have said what we meant to. However, it is important to go back to the basics. It is important to state the simplest things. So often we get swept up in our own ideas, we forget where they started. In a group hobby, in a group narrative, however fun the intrigue and depth can be, it is important to return to a shared footing. What is the story actually about? The theme of the campaign was becoming heroic in spite of the moral gray zone. After such a long deception to delve into a character's darkness, how do we get back to building upwards? What does this entire narrative depend on? After the fractures and troubles, how do we come back together? Everyone has to confidently know that the beginning of the slippery slope. Rock bottom is where you push off from, and as a group story, everyone needs that footing to direct change. This is my SendingKenku. Jokes, jabs, competition, and complexity are the spice to relationships, but not their center. To make relationships last, you have to return to shared footing. And as I said at the beginning, it might appear that this is a return to a voiceover. And as I said in the middle, you have to go back and read the text. This is how I shot this one. Have a lovely.